Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Woman Myth Bible. Today, we're going to dive into the fascinating story of Queen Vashti from the Book of Esther. We're going to explore her decision to refuse to appear before King Ahasuerus, the cultural context that might have given birth to her decision, and how it led to Esther becoming the queen. We'll also unpack the deeper meaning behind these events and what they reveal about God's divine plan. Stick around, this is going to be good. Before we dive into today's fascinating topic, I want to let you know that I have a page on Ko-fi. Ko-fi is a website similar to Patreon. Supporters there get exclusive first looks at some of my videos before they go live on YouTube. If you enjoy my content and you want to help me keep doing what I love, consider supporting me with donations on Ko-fi. Every little bit helps. I'll put a link to my Ko-fi page in the description box below. Now, let's talk about Queen Vashti, a figure from the Book of Esther who is potentially misunderstood and potentially unfairly misaligned. Was she really as non-virtuous as she's claimed to be? Let's break it down. The story begins with King Ahasuerus, who was hosting a very lavish banquet. A banquet that lasted 180 days. On the seventh day, when the king was in high spirits due to the wine he was drinking, he summoned Queen Vashti to appear before his guest wearing her royal crown. You know what? Come with me to the Book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 10 to 12. Let's hear it straight from the Bible. It says, "On the seventh day of the feast, when King Ahasuerus was in high spirits because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended to him, Mehuman, Bista, Abona, Bigta, Abagta, Zita, and Carcass, to bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious and he burned with anger." Now, here's where things get interesting. And stick around because we are about to uncover some surprising details about this request. The Bible doesn't tell us specifically why Queen Vashti refused to answer King Ahasuerus. But to understand why she potentially might have refused, we need to consider the cultural context of ancient Persia. In that time, it was highly unusual and inappropriate for a queen to appear at a men's banquet while the men were intoxicated. The separation of men and women at social gatherings was a common custom, and Vashti was actually hosting her own feast for the women of the royal household. Come with me to the Bible. The Book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1 to 3. Let's start with verse 2. It says, "At that time, Ahasuerus ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. In the 30th year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, and as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces." Come with me to chapter 1, verse 8. It says, "By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted." So we know from this that it was men that were present at the king's banquet. The following verse 9 says, "At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus." So we know that the men were at the king's banquet, while the women were at Queen Vashti's banquet. And this goes to prove what I said, that in those times it was the cultural custom that at social gatherings men and women were separated. Now, we still do not know why the queen refused to answer the king's request, but we do know that in that cultural context, the act of a queen parading herself before a group of drunken men will be seen as demeaning and inappropriate for a woman of her status. It's important to note that Vashti's refusal might not have just been about personal dignity. It might also have been about maintaining her honor in her position as a queen. Some historians have suggested that for Vashti to comply with such a request from the king, it would have been similar to being treated as a concubine or a dancing girl instead of a respected queen. The queen tried to treat Vashti like an object of display. Now, her refusal can be seen as an attempt to preserve not only her own honor, but also the king's honor, by preventing him from making a spectacle of his wife in a moment of extreme drunkenness. In light of this cultural context, Vashti's refusal appears to be reasonable or even honorable, despite the severe consequences that she faced. Her actions can be seen as a stand for dignity and respect in the face of an unreasonable and potentially humiliating demand. Now, like I said, the Bible doesn't tell us specifically why Vashti refused, but historians have mentioned these things given the cultural context. Now, I want to pause here and ask you, what do you think about Vashti's decision? Was she right to refuse the king's command? What do you think in light of the cultural context that we now know? Let me know in the comments below. The king's reaction to Vashti's refusal was swift and harsh. His advisors, fearing that Vashti's disobedience will inspire other women to defy their husbands, recommended that she be banished. It seems Vashti became a scapegoat, punished to keep all women in check. You know what? Come with me to the Book of Esther chapter 1, verse 12 to 22. It says, "But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. He immediately consulted with his wise advisors, who knew all the Persian laws and customs, for he always asked their advice. The names of these men were Kashina, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Masina, and Memucan, 7 nobles of Persia and Media. And they met with the king regularly and held the highest positions in the empire. What must be done to Queen Vashti, the king demanded. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through his eunuchs?" Do you notice here how the king is not asking whether his order was reasonable? It was simply asking what penalty should be given to the queen. But let's continue. Memucan answered the king and his nobles. He said, "Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king but also every noble and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. So if it pleases the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medians and Medes that cannot be revoked. You should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of the King Ahasuerus, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. The king and his nobles thought these made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. Let's pause for a second there. Interestingly, when the king's anger subsided, the Bible tells us in the Book of Esther, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "But after King Ahasuerus' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made." Now, we are not really sure what the king was thinking here, but it is possible that he might have regretted his decision. I mean, this is a man who made a decision that cannot be revoked in a time when he was both angry and drunk. And now that his anger has subsided, probably because the drink has faded, he said he began to think about Vashti, what she had done, and the decree he had made. This is all the Bible says. We do not know if he had regrets. We do not know what he was thinking. But when someone does something, this is normal human behavior. When someone does something and they feel justified in it, this is more of a personal take. Bear in mind, there's no Bible verse that says this. But I think when someone has done something that they feel justified in it, they won't be thinking about it once their anger has faded. When someone makes a decision in anger, when their anger has faded, it is only normal for them to think back and question the wisdom of what they did. So, the Bible doesn't tell us specifically what he was thinking, but many people, many scholars actually interpret this to mean that there possibly could have been some regret from his part. Now, before we go further, I want to mention a different video on my channel that also explores a similar theme of strong biblical women. Check out my video titled, "Was Abigail in the Bible a Pick-me woman?" This will show you a different perspective on how we interpret women's actions in biblical narratives. But wait, there's more to the story of Vashti and Abigail and King Ahasuerus. We are about to delve into how Vashti's banishment set the stage for Esther's rise to power, and you won't want to miss the surprising connections we will uncover. After Queen Vashti was banished for refusing to appear before King Ahasuerus, a search for a new queen began throughout the Persian Empire. Beautiful young women were brought to the palace, including Esther, a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther found favor with the king and was chosen to be the new queen, replacing Vashti. Some scholars argue that Vashti's removal and Esther's elevation was part of God's plan to save the Jewish people. This idea of divine substitution, where God replaces one person with another to further his purpose, is seen elsewhere in the Bible, like when the Israelites were given the promised land. When they were promised the promised land, God also said that there were people who were currently living there, but the land was going to be given to the Israelites. So we see a divine substitution going on there. While both Vashti and Esther held the position of queen, their roles in God's plan for the Jewish people were very different. Vashti's refusal to appear before the king, though courageous, ultimately led to her removal from the throne. These events, while seemingly unfortunate, set the stage for God's greater purpose. Esther's ascension to the role of queen, on the other hand, was pivotal in God's plan to save the Jewish people from annihilation. As Mordecai famously said to Esther in the Book of Esther chapter 4 verse 14, "Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this?" Let's pause for a second. This statement highlights the divine timing and purpose behind Esther's position as queen. Esther's unique position allowed her to intercede on behalf of her people, risking her own life to approach the king uninvited. Her courage and faith in God's plan enabled her to reveal a man's plot and save the Jewish people from destruction. This act of bravery fulfilled God's purpose for her role as queen, demonstrating that he had placed her in that position specifically to protect his chosen people. While Vashti's actions may have been admirable in its own right, they did not serve God's larger purpose for the Jewish people. In contrast, Esther's position as queen was instrumental in God's plan of deliverance, showcasing how he works through individuals to accomplish his will, even in the most unlikely circumstances. The story of Vashti and Esther illustrates a profound moral lesson, which is this: when God chooses someone to further his divine plan, that choice carries far more weight and significance than a human selection based on superficial qualities like beauty. While Vashti was chosen for her appearance, Esther was divinely positioned to save an entire people, demonstrating that God's purpose-driven choices are infinitely more powerful and consequential than those made for vain reasons. Speaking of women in the Bible, I have a question for you. Would you be interested in a deep dive into the story of Jezebel and the spirit of Jezebel? Let me know in the comment section below. In conclusion, Vashti's story is more complex than it might seem at first glance. Instead of being non-virtuous, she stood up for her dignity, it seems. We are inferring from the context that she stood up for her dignity in a difficult situation. And her actions, while leading to her own downfall, definitely paved the way for Esther to save the Jewish people. So, I have a question for you. Given my analysis, what do you think about Vashti's story? Was she a hero standing up for her rights? Or was she wrong to disobey the king? The Bible doesn't pass judgment on her actions, which leaves it open to interpretation. All the Bible does is tell the story. And it's up to us to interpret it based on what we see and based on context. So what do you think? What would you have done if you were Vashti? My friends, that is all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I upload videos. I really enjoy doing this and I appreciate your likes, your comments, your support. Thank you for watching and I will see you on the next one.